Well, hi. We are now presenting our
close the door because it's
some moves. Some moves that will I think connect between our discussion during these 2 days and the theory of emergency. I think that because we shift the schedule, it may be the case that some side will be redundant or will be correlated to what we already discussed. So excuse us for that. Now, our group included Nadav, Fady, and Khoury and I. Nadav, even though was the most committed one, could not be. He's not here with us, right? So just to mention Nadav. This is an image of Cascade. When you Google Cascade, so there's an image of a waterfall. And that is because the other falls represent the sequence of processes and its randomness. Okay, so let's go forward. What we will try to do is the presentation is divided to some segments. The first one is more definitional. After the definition, I will try to take the discussion one step forward and try to derivative from the definition, what is the policy variance between single silo emergency and cascading, okay? After that, we will try to remind ourselves, mainly ourselves, you are familiar with it, what is the standard theory of emergency, constitutional theory, and after that, Fady will challenge this theory somewhat in light of what we experienced as cascading. And the last move will be to show some work that already engaged with trying to transform theory in light of more complex emergencies. So there's a group in UCL within the disaster department there that was actually doing a whole research group about cascading events, as opposed to Christian and Stefan's work, which is more related to human-generated emergencies. They are coming from disaster theory, so they were more interested in nature-based emergencies. And this is a definition that they have a paper, they have a couple of papers that concluded their work. Once again, they are not interested in normative work, just positive phenomena. And they have a paper which is definitional that we use. And this is not their definition, because their definition, which I put in the formal slide, is just exhaustive. But eventually, this is a working definition, for example, of the United Nations of International Strategy for Disaster Reduction. And this is important because what is going on in the world is that different international organizations, not from the world of military intervention, but from the world of international disaster organization, are defining this phenomena. And you can take a second to read, I won't read it, but I will just emphasize some.
Nadiv, this is a definition of disaster, not of cascading.
Or the cascading disaster.
But they don't, look, with all due respect to definitions of other international organizations, they have to have a definition that will capture as much as possible. I don't think they care about the analytics. So,
of course, but so what I was about to say, following our Fady and me when we were tuning the presentation, we are not using this definition as something determinate, but we just need something to work with and to try to see how these definitions come from the organizations that de facto are working within cascading environments. So I think that's an interesting definition.
Let's see some is cascading or not cascading.
No, they do. They do.
Why?
They definitely do.
For what purpose?
For different kinds of policy recommendation and intervention.
Okay, that will be important.
Yeah, of course. This is
what
our.
Will they do in cascading?
This is our thrust. So you will see in a second. This is our thrust.
Wonderful.
A couple of elements. Something which is disruptive, like a single silo. Something that affects the functioning of the community and the society. Once again, there are similarities because regular declaration is a threat on the nation and so on and forth. But what they mean is the community, not only in the state level, as a whole, and widespread human, material, economic, or environmental losses. So it once again should be something that the damages are also multi-systematic, and this is something that different from a single silo. It exceeds the ability of affected community to cope. Whether we are talking on a realm of a city, so for example, this group made, if you asked about implication, this group made a plan for cascade events in London, okay, which is different from a fire in London, for example. But yes, you can question those definitions fine. Here are some differences. First of all, a need for a cross-border emergency response. This is not a single silo event, I think, as we imagine it in constitutional law, right? Interaction of natural and human systems, also something that is familiar. Could be considered as a direct output of evolving complex system. I will elaborate in a minute. And randomness may determine the temporal evolution of the system, which further complicates matters. The randomness of further consequences of the crisis. Critical infrastructure and facilities are important because they act as a source of implications. So this is also something that evolved from the positive work. The world and the state are now comprised from all different IC, critical infrastructure. Once again, also in cyber emergencies, we are familiar with that, but those are amplifications. So for example, you have nuclear power, which amplified the earthquake, okay? The relationship between vulnerability, politics, policy, crisis management, capacity determines how escalating event will manage. I think that also Stefan and Christian talk about it. There's a human political, the crisis will escalate and will require political and policy response, but it could also become one that the response will escalate the crisis. So let's have another slide. So this is, in my view, a good way of receiving cascading, which is different from single silo.
Okay? I don't understand the difference, but tell us what it means.
Okay, we'll see in a second. You have, imagine the yellow spotlights as single silo emergencies. What you see in a cascading event is, first of all, the first one could sequence 4 or 5 different effects, which are crises, which are different isolated sequential crises. And more severely, what you see here is that you have a tree of possibilities. Each and every one of them are different emergency you need to contain. This is not single silo. Okay? And the difference between this and that is this is somewhat sequential and maintains a relationship of causality, and this is random. You as a policy planner, you don't know what to do, how to foresee these events. You don't know.
Why not?
Because what happens is,
if it's again sequential,
this is sequential.
Why is it not sequential?
As bigger. So okay. So here just a comment about complex and cascading systems.
Just in terms of the system theory, this is also sequential.
Yeah.
Because when you draw it like this, one follows from one, it's just a tree is a bit more complex.
Yeah, but as complicated the tree event goes, you don't have a foreseeable ability. You have extreme stochastic and randomness. So for example, I'm standing here and there was an earthquake. All of you are probabilities to what is going to happen in a short period of time after the earthquake. I, in the starting point, cannot foresee all of your possibilities. If you are familiar with theoretical models, so you have, this is not decision tree, this is event tree, but in complexity theory, this is what we call stochastic process. Stochastic process is ones that you know how you got into, but you don't know what will happen further on. There are all kinds of models, if you are familiar. If you want us to bring a system theory guy or a game theoretical guy that will talk about Markovian chains, so there are works, if you are familiar with, there are works that are trying to build models that will, to some extent, foresee all kinds of possibilities. And also within the disaster theory, there are models that take a couple of typological crises like earthquake, fire, disaster, and so on. But as you will see from the examples, you don't always, as opposed, for example, to war. Okay, think about war. You have an enemy, he declared the war, I declared an emergency. This is a condensed single silo event. This is not the case of cascading.
So wait, if I look at it, so A is a single silo event, right? It's E.
No, even A is not a single silo.
This is the point.
E is effect, which is what we call impact, okay? It's cause and effect. So the cause is the event, right? And it has a number of different
But the effects themselves are crises.
No.
Crisis is one.
Not any impact. I think that.
Wait. Look up here.
It doesn't mean anything.
Wait, I'm just trying to understand the diagram. Look up here. On B, you have the cause,
And this is
which has
already a
an
cause.
effect that makes a cause that has different effects.
And those are also single silo.
No,
Emergency
I mean
gas.
no, but that's cascading because it's a tree. Whereas the other one is just the impacts. It says impacts. Which
Okay, so this is, I would have said that in terms of the definition and the unfolding of the events, this is a more classical cascade, but this is also, I think that you are blurring the difference between impact and effect, and within this paper, I'm sure. No, but
What is the difference between
Can I intervene here a little bit? Yeah, so I think this is one of the models that's being proposed in the literature. We need to be very clear on that. This is still debated in the disaster.
Right. That's David
So,
Alexander, who's
yeah.
actually the editor of the International Journal of Disaster Risk Reduction.
So he's
trying to bring the most relevant people.
This piece is the most authoritative in terms of what cascading is, and their model is actually, this is not cascading in their model. This is a traditional cause, effect. What they distinguish is that the trigger, the event, the hazard, the risk, whatever happens first, may cause a bunch of effects, but these effects, given the interconnectedness of different human systems, electricity grid, like a nuclear plant, might get to become from an effect into its own independent cause, creating effects that cannot be attributed to the first cause. So this is like a very simple diagram of what cascading
Wait. They can be attributed, but it doesn't help us that they are attributed in the sense that cascading is nonetheless something triggered some other thing, as this tree reveals. But as soon as you have the EC, let's say the middle EC here, it matters less that there is the C up above, because this EC here acts independently as if there was no C above. It doesn't care. That's the thing. So even if it's attributed, it has a power to generate on its own.
It generates a whole strand of
Exactly.
This is why I said it's a crisis, in the sense that if you think about it, just a second, if you think about it in terms of what justifies a declaration, this and this already has its own
emergency. Not crisis, emergency.
So he's saying, I'm reading what he's saying. Okay, so what he is saying is that most disasters, high degree, from now on, most disasters will be cascading events, cascading impacts to a greater or lesser extent, meaning it can still be one silo, but the impacts are all interrelated. This is a high degree of dependency on networks of modern society, hazards of all kinds, storms, cyber attacks, etc. So, and some of them in the second one cause other, but indeed the E is for effect or impact, and the C
The C,
is
yeah.
Okay, of course. Yeah, this is what Fady said.
That's what I said, and we need to be clear. Yeah, their empirical kind of diagnosis is that you rarely have like a single silo in
Exactly.
society.
This literature is
So
now.
the comparison is normally between a pretty simple society in which an earthquake is an earthquake,
But
right?
it was never an earthquake.
But I'm just saying that in a society that you don't have complex systems like internet, electricity, nuclear plants, you can still think of a disaster being singular to an extent. But what their point is, like you said, is that in more modern societies with complex systems, you will rarely have an isolated.
What happened within this literature?
You'll really have isolated impacts.
You already had it, and you didn't have it from the 50s.
You can still have, what they're saying is because of how society, how complex society is and how interconnected it is, a single silo event will not only
We always have
make a big
impact.
hole or something.
Exactly.
Earthquake,
We
okay?
always have
It'll
cascading
affect
impact.
water, it'll affect people, it'll affect buildings, it'll affect everything. Okay,
But
so
this
that's,
effect is not necessarily a C. It's always an
yes,
E,
I know.
but it's not
Effect
a C.
is, no, effect, impact and effect are the same thing.
That's right.
Synonym,
That's
okay?
right.
So
You'll have
E
always a
is
C.
your impact. So we've got all disasters now
Has impact.
will have cascading
Impact, but that's not interesting. Why? Because it's as of the 50s.
No, but that's true, okay? And
It's
then
true,
he
but
says
trivial.
that there are also disasters where those impacts or those effects cause another disaster.
That's what's
And
interesting.
that's
When you have,
So I don't know if we're reading the same paper, but I actually, I don't think they present this as a cascade. I mean, it's not interesting, not because it's not happening, because a single silo might cause this.
right, but their paper is talking about, you're right, but their paper is talking about cascading impacts.
Impacts. And even that is cascading
Not
impact.
necessarily, and that's definitely cascading.
But the cascading
It's
disaster
not
one is
necessarily
that one.
cascading disaster.
when the Tokyo earthquake made the nuclear power go, whatever.
That's a
That's an impact or that's a disaster?
That's a disaster.
That's a disaster followed by a disaster.
That's right.
Now we can also think about.
Cascading disaster.
That's a cascading disaster.
Great. So let's see some examples maybe. Fady?
I just to conclude, A is not a cascading disaster.
Well,
It's a
no,
cascading
but it has
impact.
cascading
Yeah, okay.
impacts.
It's a single, in our terminology,
We are more interested. I don't want to argue, but we are more interested in.
Okay.
I mean, we might be interested in the other two if we're talking about cascading impacts, but all I'm saying is that what this is showing is.
This is the earthquake. This is the nuclear.
So we need to be clear that this is one of the opinions that exist, and it's the most advanced.
It's
And
not exhaustive.
our job here is to see whether or not it actually fits our.
Right, but.
Research
he
interest.
is- It does, I mean, it's.
He's an authority.
Huh?
I mean, Alexander is an authority
No,
for sure.
Oh, he is.
We don't conflict. We
No.
make a distinction between
impact
No,
and
but he's
impact.
talking
Yeah.
about that disasters all have cascading effects. That's
Right.
what he's talking.
And it's
it's
trivial.
true.
It's trivial in the sense that as of the 50s,
Right.
if you have a power shutdown, hospitals are affected.
And what you are saying also affects the way we as constitutional lawyer understand single silo emergency. Because in constitutional theory, we had some kind of perception of a single silo without no effects event. And according to this perception, we constructed the constitutional theory. And this is not a fit anymore. Let's see some examples, Fady, if you can if you want us to keep on talking. So these are some examples, once again, from Alexander, that was not presented yesterday, but could help us imagine cascade situation, which is contained, not Yugoslavia, Sudan complex, just a cascading event. So the first one is Baltimore train disaster. What happened is that there's a train disaster with hundreds of people that killed, but then the train got into a tunnel that broken some fibers, some optical fibers, and then what happened is that there was an internet shutdown of half of the United States for 3 days. So we have this one, a disaster, and this one, unexpected, or at least unexpected in terms of vulnerability before that. Second example.
Wait, before the second example, here we have to realize that there's a distinction. The vulnerability existed, we just didn't know about it. So there's hidden vulnerability.
Vulnerability always exists.
That's what I'm saying. Without the vulnerability, you wouldn't have it. You're right. But you have hidden vulnerabilities and you have exposed vulnerabilities. This exposed the vulnerability that wasn't known.
And once again, a policy decision maker could not foresee the fact. Let's think about the policy decision maker that is responsible for the train safety. The ability of him to foresee the internet shutdown was almost not existent in T1.
I think you're right. This is in T1, the internet responsible person who planted the cables inside the railway.
So we'll talk about,
should have taken the consideration.
We will talk about executive coordination. Okay, sababa.
So
second example, Prague River flooding, even bigger one. There was a flood in the Prague, I don't remember the name of the river, but there's a river, believe me, I was there. Maybe Charles River, yeah, but then the flood flooded a couple of rivers in 4 countries, and then the whole 4 countries were affected in infrastructure-wise, which required a NATO intervention, and also critical infrastructure was affected by the flood. Okay, and also evacuating 100,000 people, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to pronounce it, but it's a well-known example from Iceland in 2010. There was a volcano, but what was not foreseen is that because of the ash volcano, all aviation in Europe was shut down for a week, which once again, this is like billions of millions of dollars, computer science-wise, critical infrastructure-wise, 2 different events that cascade. Tokyo earthquake, we talked about it. Yes.
These are all examples of what tree?
Second.
Second tree, because it's a...
Those are all C, and you
it's C, and I cannot foresee C.
It's not just an impact, it creates itself a disaster on its own, and we can reduce everything to impact. It's to make life easier, we can say, all life is impact when we're born, and then until we die, we have impacts.
Now, really, look at that. Okay, the Tokyo was already discussed here, but see the sequence, and then you will know that after Tokyo, we already know that earthquake creates tsunamis and all kinds of things, but we didn't know that it could affect the pollution of a nuclear power. Now we know that as well. And by the way, even before the Tokyo event, we knew that there was a problem of nuclear reduction and pollution because of the fall of the Soviet Union and the satellite countries there, but never mind. But then the other effect was, for example, a strong effect on the car chain of production worldwide. Once again, it's not something that happened 10 years afterwards. By the way, 440 square kilometers of coastal needed reconstruction. And if Christian talked about the fact that those disasters impact the political discourse and the constitutional discourse and the community. So what happens because of this disaster is that European countries started to talk about nuclear reduction due to what we saw. So
like a form of transformation.
Exactly. So this is like a prominent example. Hurricane Sandy is not interesting here as Hurricane Sandy. It is interesting because it has all kinds of effects. Like we knew that it could destroy a lot of houses. But for example, we didn't know that it could affect. Maybe we knew, but the shutdown of Nasdaq is a different and similar. I agree that in terms of foreseeability, you might be.
There's something that you need to clarify here because you emphasize 2 things that might be related, but I'm not sure. Foreseeability and the magnitude of the effect or the relationship. And I'm not sure, it seems to me that you emphasize foreseeability here as a maybe necessary condition to perceive it as cascading, and I'm not sure that this is the case, right? So
I will defend.
In many ways, it deviates from discussion in the last 2 days, right? So
why?
Because we can assume, for example, that war might lead to an enormous economic meltdown. But these are two.
But the
magnitude of the two effects, or to pandemic or whatever, like a huge disaster. But the mere ability to foresee it, does it affect our ability to look at these as two distinct causes, in the sense that we discussed here for the last 2 days, right? To me, it seems that the magnitude of the event is the most important feature of the definition, rather than the ability to foresee.
So, first of all, I think both of them, but I think that foreseeability is important because we are interested in those events, once again, in the policy sphere, because we are thinking about preparedness. And foreseeability is important because if it doesn't exist, you cannot prepare.
Wait. Yeah, just to address your concern. What you're asking is what makes into an independent C, if I understood you correctly. So here, I don't think he cares so much about this, but for us, the fact that there are cascading impacts, I think, was a given in 12 years of research. We always realized that this can lead to impacts. The question is whether Fukushima. Fukushima is the story. Fukushima is the place in Japan. So when Fukushima happens, you don't care what triggered. You have a nuclear disaster which requires.
This was my point. That it's not related to the question of foreseeability.
Wait. It is related to the question of foreseeability, but it's not related to the question of foreseeability when the flood happened. I'm not sure. Maybe yes, maybe not. That's what I'm trying to say is that some things are disasters in and of themselves, whether in the same silo or in a different silo, which from a policy and a legal and economic perspectives require response and preparedness on their own. So they're beyond impact. They're also impact, but regardless of whether they're impact or not, they're disasters in and of themselves, which require legal machinery, special agencies to deal with them. Rehab that is related to them specifically and not to others. So you have a standalone container of that disaster that happened, and we should recognize this.
But this seems to me, exactly, so this is to me, your definition or your position now seems to me as something very different than what Nadiv suggests or this paper, right? Because you focus, yes, but you focus on the nature of the event. You're saying Fukushima is such a major thing.
Not because necessarily it's a major, because it's not necessarily because it's a major, it's because the characteristics require specific radiation people, specific plans then to deal with water, small or big. I mean, the magnitude could be part of it. It has to be above a certain magnitude, but the magnitude above is complex. It's not the upper ceiling.
But I see what you're saying.
It focuses on the nature of the disaster rather than the connection between the.
No, but wait. But just to complete, you're right. But when you build Fukushima, you have to take care that it could because of another disaster. So when you build the Nasdaq, or when you build the cyber optics and you do it inside the train, so you say I'm saving. Why? Because when you build the train, to put the cyber in it, it costs less. And I know I don't have to expropriate.
Not only in
Because wait, I don't have to expropriate any land because the train is already there. And I can access for repair because I can But when you also build it, you have to take care that the train will have a train accident and then you lose your cyber.
Well, what is he
But
saying?
why do I care? So there was a failure, right? We try to define the phenomenon, right?
Yes.
So whether they should have thought about it or not is unrelated to the question whether we have here cascading.
No, it is. Because in present crisis, you know that more emergency are coming ahead, but you don't know what they are. This is why unforeseeability is important.
No, it's not definitionally important, in my opinion. I agree with you that for the definition's purposes, like our ability to foresee and model the cascades is not important for the definition itself. It's important for the stages of recovery. They say it can be random, but foreseeability is not like if it's something foreseen doesn't mean it's not a cascade. It couldn't be a cascade. It means that we can prepare better to mitigate and prevent the impacts that could make a disaster larger and more cascading.
Which brings me to the question whether there is really a difference between cascading effects and cascading disasters.
I think there is.
I don't think so.
Can I answer this? I mean,
I'm not sure.
the question is whether, let's say, look at the earthquake, the fact that leads to a tsunami, what's the difference between a tsunami than its effect on the nuclear plant? And so we do say there is some difference. And so maybe it's that, but both of them are kind of, we have some effect. But one, let's say, as the tsunami, we somehow put it into the bracket. We already know that it's part of the effects of the earthquake. But it's the nuclear plant meltdown, we don't recognize. I think we don't sort it out in the same kind of disaster. The nuclear plant creates, the fact that the nuclear plant creates a new disaster, I'm more, let's say, Yali said the nature of it. The nature of this new disaster makes it different.
You have stress, right? So any vulnerability that happens in an event creates stress. These are the impact. So the stress is an impact. You have fire, more people will die because of air pollution 30 miles from the fire. Why? Because you breathe the low smoke. It's part of the stress. At a certain point, the hospital may collapse if 30 miles you have too many people, and that becomes an independent emergency there if the three conditions are met, or an emergency here that now has another line. The stress materializes not only to the emergency of fire because you have to evacuate the people of the fire, but 30 miles away from it, hospitals begin to collapse. Then you have a new line, and then the event here generates two types of, right? So the stress is there's always an impact.
But Amnon, these examples, 1, 2, 3, 4, can be analyzed under A or under B.
Well, no, it depends on the legal system.
The definition before, okay, the slide before A and B.
The chart, yeah.
Okay, the chart. You can say that the internet shutdown of half of the United States is part of the chain of A. Okay, another effect. Another effect.
No, but the fact that you have an effect, I'm asking you now, is the internet shutdown an emergency?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a C. If your answer is yes, then you're in a C situation.
Not necessarily.
If you're for us,
A or B.
You decide.
We are in the B.
I'm asking you.
It's a new C. A new A. Another A.
You move from A to B.
That's it. If it's a C,
So give me an example of A.
give an example of A. What I just said. You have a fire.
Yeah.
The fire then generates a disaster or an emergency in affected area. 30 miles, more people have to go to the hospital.
No, that's
It's not,
B already.
no, but the hospital can handle it.
Okay.
But you have more people to die. You have, because it's stress, it's impact, but it doesn't raise to the level of emergency. So you have to shut down work for 3 hours because people cannot go to work.
Okay.
It's an impact, but it's not, so people have to.
The same with half shutdown for the internet of half a day in the US.
Yeah, so that's a good question.
Yeah, but if you have a shutdown that shut down all
Hospitals.
critical digital infrastructure of hospital in a way that your country cannot provide מכונות הנשמה or whatever, then you are in a different emergency.
This is what the question is. What
I'm happy to feel about this, distinction is really.
That's okay. We can keep questioning this. I'm just saying that I'm not married to it. I have no vested emotional attachment to it. I'm just saying that there is a logical structure with which to analyze situations like this. To say that any disaster has a cascading impact, which is what he's saying. As of the 50s, 1950s, as soon as you move to modernization in modern society, any disaster has an impact beyond the snow that fell, because delays, you have a snow and then flights are delayed. So, okay, so it has an impact beyond that. The question is, sometimes it becomes a standalone crisis, because when the internet is being shut down for 12 hours, internet commerce, viruses, security, whatever, all things are happening, regardless of the mother crisis that started the...
There are two different separate
And there's a
questions.
shutdown, which is an effect, and there's a shutdown, which is an emergency. When all aviation in all Europe is shutting down for a week, this is an international emergency. It's not just... It's not like the Houthi missiles that we shut down Ben Gurion Airport for 3 hours. It's not the same scale. It's not the same damages. You don't need the same response.
The stress doesn't amount to an emergency.
And once again, I will go back to foreseeability. The Amnon example with the fire and the ash is to some extent already foreseeable. What is interesting, I think, within this literature of cascading is, and I'm not just mentioning Markovian change for free, is that what we are trying to do within this, as far as I understand it, within this project of understanding emergencies cascading, is to be more equipped in foreseeing all kinds of different chains of events.
Is there a difference between the internet shutdown example and fire that brings to people coming to the government building and with violent means to get rid of the government?
Right. Before you answer, there are two different questions here. One, do we agree that A is not cascading and B is cascading? That's one question. And the second question is, when E becomes C, if we agree that, if we don't care at this point when E becomes C, but we agree that when E becomes C, we're moving to cascading, that's the question we need
And
to deal about.
there's a lot of E that could probability, that there's a probability that they will become C.
But wait. Just on this issue, so you're raising questions that are unforeseen now, because maybe people don't foresee that out of the fire there will be riots, violence. So if it could be technically, it's exactly the case that Shefan would love to.
We talked about it.
Would love to research and say, okay, because of the natural disaster there was a coup, or there was wonderful for him. I'm saying that with respect to probability, this is just to probability or uncertainty. The other issue of probability, and so what cascading does is it brings two types of uncertainty to mind. There is uncertainty whether the new E will it all be generated as an E. So you don't think about the relationship between fire and coup, or between trains and but it's your own, because you just didn't recognize the vulnerability. You were, because of the complexity of the intertwined system, we don't see the vulnerabilities, but they're everywhere. And then there is another uncertainty, once it's an E, whether it will become a C, whether the impact will mount to an emergency, and this is very difficult to calculate, to compute. You don't necessarily know this. It's because of the interconnectedness. So, but again, probability is just one probability, and the idea, or uncertainty, the idea of magnitude of the system. These are two of the three components of emergency.
I think that we should go forward to Khoury's presentation because I think it will piss off Amnon much more than what happened until now.
I also think that we need to be able. So we have the next session about definitions and stuff. So
The same session.
it's the same. Oh, okay.
It's a continuation.
We do have 29 slides. I mean,
Finish.
No, it's okay. So we had one more definitional debate. I want to. No, I think that Khoury will bring us a chart of policy variance between singular emergency and cascading emergency, and let's see what are your intuition about that. I have to say that I think that you will find that a lot of the differences is not necessarily between single silo and cascading, but in terms of disaster law and preparedness, we are already prepared for
I agree.
The complication of single silo emergency, and yet we try to find some literature that talks about differences. So we're already focused. So now we're going to do this.
Okay, so I wonder if you're going to be indeed happy with this or not.
Which is the most important criteria, our happiness.
we're here to please.
No, your intuitions. It's important. You have 12 years of sharpened intuition, the doubts.
Just before we start, so the bottom line was that you kind of got the definition that was proposed moving towards this definition.
I don't think we have a recommendation, but I think so the position that is up for discussion here is, so clearly these definitions are not just general. Their aim is, they aim to kind of incorporate different types of disasters into the management models that exist within disaster study. So that's how they conceive of their definition. Our project aims at kind of different objectives. It looks at the rule of law. So I'm in the few slides that come up with this, we're going to try to pose some questions, but these need to be in mind before we commit to a definition source.
Here again is...
And I would add that I think that relatively to the yesterday discussions about the Sudanese, Yugoslavian, Iraqi case, we are confining the situation towards a more narrow, disaster-oriented definition. And so even if you don't take face value this definition, I think that the image of Cascade should be narrower than the yesterday discussion. So
here again, it's not our recommendations or what we think should be done, but what is being done or being offered to be conducted at the moment. So it's just a map of what's the literature or what kind of part of the literature.
Again, the beginning talks about the impacts.
Yeah.
Not the disaster. We're talking about impact, cascading impacts.
No, but the issue is how to prepare to, yes. So we wanted to illustrate how the difference looks when you move, when you shift from discussing, from talking about so-called normal disasters to cascading disasters. So we have 10 points. I'm not sure that we should go on all of them, but just let me know. So first, when we talk about impact scope, Usually in conventional emergencies, we talk about a single system, and in cascading emergencies, complex chains of disruption across multiple systems.
Next.
Sounds
You have to. Yeah. It's clear. It's obvious.
okay. So planning and preparedness, fixed scenarios, and in cascading emergencies, we talk about multiple what-if scenarios, much more difficult to predict and to anticipate, mitigation strategies. So it's action taken in advance to reduce the impact of known hazards. In cascading emergencies, we talk about coordinated action across sectors and not isolated actions, and across borders, international organizations, communities, etc. Risk models and uncertainty. Tools used to estimate the likelihood and impact of hazards. Again, we move from a fixed assumption and past experience to a lot of uncertainty and trying to develop a theory of how to cope with uncertainty, not stationary in the conventional emergency situation, understanding that we have missing data, feedback loops, etc. Tipping points in all conventional emergencies are usually well known. And again, in cascading emergencies, we have to reinvent the wheel.
I don't understand this. So the first four, as Deborah said, were not cascading emergencies for our definition, but cascading impacts. And the question then is the following. Let us say that my approach is, so who is the audience for the first 4 points? We can talk about the government as a whole or the society as a whole, or we can say, you know what, each agency, you're responsible for the stock market. I would put Eli as in charge of the stock market, he enjoys the training in the stock market, etc. So he has to prepare for the ability that the stock market will be shut down because of an economic crisis, but also because of fire, because of earthquake, because of but from his perspective, he doesn't, he just needs to know what happens when the stock market is shut down, and he needs to know that when there is any kind of emergency, because everything is connected, he has to run his emergency. People have to run to their positions not to know whether to shut down or not.
The question is whether he needs to know what are the effects that his emergency can.
No, why not? Because another agency is responsible for the other effect.
But he's not responsible for stopping other emergencies.
No, each agency takes conceivably could be that each agency is a gatekeeper of this agency, and this applies to the first four. We have to make a choice, and this relates back to Yali's point or to Eli's point, both, whether we should make a difference between impact and new emergency. But point number 5 says that, no. Point number 5 changes the whole idea, because Eli, as in charge of the stock market, will have to make a decision whether to shut the stock market or not. You're saying here, well, Eli might not have a criteria under which condition to shut down the stock market because the threshold for what, and this seems to be peculiar. Because, if you're in charge of a certain sector, if you're in charge of the fire, you wouldn't know whether to shut the stock market. But if he's in charge of the stock market, he knows whether to shut the stock market.
He doesn't know well enough the real estate market.
But he shuts down. He doesn't need to know. He shuts down. And in the real estate market, people will have to understand what happens if this is shut down, whether to shut down the.
But that's a problem.
This is exactly the issue that he has to take a responsibility of.
No, he doesn't. That's a question.
But that's a problem that's being highlighted in the literature.
But this is exactly the point about cascading. That at least this is what I read in the literature. He does have to take responsibility. because if not, it's going to go out of control.
Let's assume a certain type of control that is centralized, and I just put a question mark on this. Because we can think of decentralized systems because of the complexity. We can think of decentralized, we think of the Berian hierarchical system, there's a central matkal, there's a central command, and they have to, but if you are now the Russian army or the Nazi Germany or the US army, you have management of different theaters, segments, and each fight their own battle. And they have enough resources, and then surely at some point it will, but you have a much longer latitude until, because you shut down the stock market, and that's what you do.
Decision making under uncertainty.
That's right, but it doesn't necessarily change the threshold.
No, and in real time. That's right. It just.
But it doesn't necessarily.
No, I know.
Number 5 is not. It could be, but it's not essential.
Still all impact.
Yes, it's not.
I think that you might imagine that as the difference between the Shteol fire, which started and contained within the Chapak of national security in Kabot Israel, to a crisis that demands real-time roundtable of many agencies.
But
and then
still
one
single silo. But the fire people should
not
be able
no.
to do.
So for example, if you foresee cascading events, but you still don't know what cascading events is, so one of the things that you need to do in terms of preparedness is, for example, decentralized agency powers and coordinate, and not, for example, run it by the executive core. So this is, I'm going to head towards this, but for example, in the single silo classical state of emergency, at least historically speaking, we had this image of a dictator that runs the emergency, and then the modern manifestation of this image is the executive core leadership that runs the emergency. And cascading events require other realignment, in the sense that multi-agency coordination is much more important as opposed to a war.
This is point number 4 and not point number 5.
Okay, fair enough. I would just
point number 5 is just becomes it assumes something about knowledge that I'm not sure. Again, there's an analytical problem here in number 5. But wait, let's continue.
I see number 5 as foreseen that it's going to scale. Just simply as a result of
plan as opposed to
if you are early, you're going to be aware of many more scenarios.
That's right, but are not fixed or easily measurable. I wonder, I have AI now, and I can tell, I can say, what, if this hits this point, you shut down the stock market, and then the real estate knows what to do, and it assumes a certain. Okay, we said it. I'm rehashing.
2015.
Yeah.
Okay. Daniel,
something.
Okay,
but also it's, you don't know what's going to be the next disaster. So maybe you're an illusion of control, but
I'm not saying I'm in the same illusion of control I was before, whether it's cascading or not. But okay, let's.
So number 7 is
Daniel had a comment.
Can I ask? Are there conventional disasters today? Based on this definition, can you give me an example of something that's conventional?
Conventional disaster?
Yeah, today, not historically.
The Shteol fire.
And you're saying that they don't have to be prepared for any other systems shutting down, that you don't have. It seems like today we prepare for all disasters as cascading events, not as
in terms of impact.
Right.
Cascading impact is we just have to realize, but it was already
This is
there.
mostly cascading.
Let's go. Number 6. Okay.
No, but I agree that I think we can see that because this is again what we found in the literature. The gap is not very clear.
Maybe it's up. What?
No, I read like 4.
But this was 10 years ago. This article was written 10 years ago.
No, but it's not only that article.
It's not that article, it's not
No,
that
it
much of
made
a.
it.
But the problem, it's authoritative, but other definitions are the same. And other knowledges of cascading are the same.
Danielle's point is correct in that a lot of the literature, and you must know it more than we do, is saying the more complex society becomes, the more technologically dependent, the more systems
And
are
also-
interconnected. One disaster or one hazard is going to have So
And the question is there an escalation? So there is a definitional element which says that what differentiates normal disaster from a cascading disaster is its chronology. If the Ishtaol fire will unfold as something that has 4 more C's, then this is a cascading. And this is, as a policymaker, something that we know. And if it will be contained in one day of, aviation, fire ship, and whatever, so this is a normal disaster.
Okay, let's 6.
So we're just going to
So
say
the
now.
question is, maybe I rephrase the question. The thought. The question is not what is cascading or what is not cascading, but what are the sensors that help us determine what is cascading event and what is not cascading.
How do you know? Yes.
What are the sensors?
What do you mean by sensors?
What will detect
For example,
what will detect
This is
the
another
spillover? Wait.
Yeah.
So, but he's thinking from a policy perspective. The guy has to run systems. And then he says, okay, what type of detection mechanisms do I need to see for a spillover from one contained disaster to the other seas?
Exactly. And some disasters might not be.
Okay, so, but that's okay. But it's good in the sense that our research can then talk about spillovers. When one thing starts to spill over beyond just stress.
and also think about the question, how do we prepare towards a disaster in a world in which we are already familiar with cascading disaster. So the Eshtaol fire, the state apparatus towards fire is now different because we are familiar with the literature about cascading, right?
Okay, let's go.
Accepted.
But in order to make it clear the idea, take the analogy of medicine, medical work. They have certain criteria. You come to hospital, they can tell you, because of their experience, what is serious and what can be ignored or what can be.
אם האישונים שלך מורחבים, ישר ניתן לך CT.
יש פרמטרים מאוד ברורים של מה יכול להיות רציני ומה...
But the problem is that we don't know the human body that well, but even in the world, the variance of event and the probability that they will manifest.
This is what you talked about before.
We cannot foresee that.
Based on practice.
No, but there's
You don't
lots
have enough
more data in terms of medicine, right? Here, there are a lot more uncertainty.
Unknowns.
So where are the uncertainty?
But historically, there are so many crises.
You would be surprised how little we investigate backwards, how little we know after the fact. Because even today, you know that in Israel, there was not one official research on what happened during COVID, what measures did we do, how successful they were, what can we learn? Not one in Israel. Not even about that. No, so we don't know. You think that we will have practice. Some people have institutional memory what we did in COVID. No empirical data.
Has to do with the government, not with the...
But the research community as well.
But on the other hand, we learned face to face. We improved by good basis.
Okay, let's see.
Okay, so I'll
Continue.
mapping. So again, it's a
Same idea.
same idea, but what's important here is not the idea, is that we read papers that talks about the need for remapping, for reinventing all this infrastructure.
This is the production chain of disaster. This is important to map the production chain of disaster.
7 is quite similar to what we talked about, coordination across agencies. So the stand of Eli is the head of the stock exchange working alone. The there's a lot of calls to move forward to a constant coordination between agencies. Public involvement, so from limited public involvement, usually receiving alerts and following preset instructions, to public, the public needs to understand how risk can evolve across systems.
This cuts both ways.
Yeah, you can do it.
You can do it.
You should have included the public.
Yeah, public goes both ways because the more complexities, the public may lose it and say, just give me the alert, tell me what to do. I just need to know what to do. And vice versa. If it's a single, maybe the public needs to know more.
But there's time. Cascading is timely. And
so
then
maybe
you have more options.
Maybe not.
The preparedness efforts.
Yeah, it's not your fault, but this is a bit childish that assumes. Okay.
No, but if building resilience, it's quite, when you read the full papers, it seems reasonable that you can have a lot of unexpected disasters. So the public
needs to know that they're unexpected, but not more than.
No, but there's I think
I don't want to argue. Okay, we can talk more about it.
Between following a preset rules and an agile system of informing the public is sharp, in my view. But think about Corona versus Eshtaol fire. Don't go in Kvish Mispar 1. And Corona was
don't stand beyond 2 feet from 6 feet. They're both
but half a month later it changes.
Your examples are covering a hazard that hit. This is preparedness. So this is basically includes ideas about how to involve the public in the pre-event.
But this is true also for single cert.
Yeah.
Okay, let's
I just don't see that it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I agree. It doesn't matter.
לא מגינים פה על כל ההנחות האלה.
Okay. Nine.
Designed around short, isolated events versus much longer events that evolve over time. And Ken is also not mind-blowing. The premise is to compare directly here, and the premise must account for known knock-on effects across regions.
All countries.
Yes, but this becomes complex. Our definition is here. Okay.
And one undermining,
Just a question. Does it matter in the literature to connect Nadiv, Fady, and you? Does it matter whether it's an E or a C? No. Here we go. Or if it doesn't matter whether an E and a C, then we have to think what it means to us. And B, does this matter? So the ability, when you hit points where, excuse the language, the shit hit the fan, but the fan itself is now like you reach a situation where you have to priority between the C's. You have to prioritize between the C's because you cannot deal with all the C's at the same time.
This is what differentiates cascading from complex.
So that's right. So does this come up in the literature? The notion that complex, that it could be single silo or multiple.
From what I saw, the difference is that relatively to this is a contained crisis. In the sense, what is complexity from where it comes? It comes from complexity theory.
Exactly.
Complexity theory in the social science is the interaction between vast, enormous human and geographical environmental systems.
But do they talk about this distinctly? No.
So the cascading field is, I think, not obsessed with complex situation. It is, I think, engaged in trying to define that. But I think that we saw, and we also presented in the February workshop, that there's a more broad perception of complex system which exceed the states, for example.
Right.
Okay, this is where I'm getting it. One more question. Is there any distinction between this and this?
We're not done here.
Okay.
So no. And I tried in the February session to kind of cover the distinctions. Let's be clear. Cascading, we have 2 papers that try to define, 2.5 papers, because these same authors have some sort of an update. multiple is usually presented as compound.
Okay.
And
parallel.
Yeah, so compound to me sounds more of a kind of, but there's no like one authoritative definition. But compound,
We would be the authoritative.
yeah, you can be, but the term compound usually refers to scenarios where you have two events that you don't necessarily have any relationship between them. Then complex, and this I warned about previously, and I'm going to warn about again. This is a professional term, complex emergencies or complex humanitarian emergencies. Both are being used interchangeably in the international management of, and the content that you attribute to this, the geographical kind of seeping of disasters or the impact. The fact that the state itself cannot respond efficiently, that you need external help. All of these components are part of the international manuals. And so, so it exists in that context, but usually you'll find conflict, war, violence, and it refers to violence eruptions, and that
let's say natural death.
I mean, I didn't see natural disasters being utilized in that context, but maybe you can expand this. But again, just be aware of how it's being used.
Okay. More things on this? Before policy, we saw that this was also part of policy.
No, but I have some points that I want to emphasize that are already in the thrust of
just a question
how it relates to constitutional emergency.
Okay, but before, so that maybe I should wait until after. Okay, so I'll wait until. Okay.
Don't wait.
No.
Unleash yourself.
So you might be interested in, there's one paper, empirical, that does discuss the term extreme events and the different traditions or scholarly works that utilize that term, from engineering to social science, and states that there is no unified meaning to that. So because it's contested and used variably, this could replace the complex. I get it.
Okay. So I have some observations about, after we talked about it quite a lot, so maybe I will scan those slides. Some observations that are related to all kinds of characteristics of constitutional emergency. So, first of all, in terms of duration, we have this imagination. Once again, might be not updated since the 50s and now, but we have this imagination of emergency. It comes and goes, we deal with it, and so on. Cascade events are not like that. They're escalated a long time. So it could be when we declare about it, maybe we can change the essence of declaration, so on and so forth. Quite obvious, but once again, will affect many state systems and not contain geography.
But isn't it the opposite of what you said like 25 minutes ago?
Why?
Because you said that all of the case studies are different than how you view it as like more limited selected events.
Relatively to the Yugoslavia extreme condition, it is limited.
Okay, so
but the chronology of that as a disaster will be prolonged and escalated. Okay? Once again, think about a 3 or 4 month crisis, not an extreme condition. It will start from something, and then it will become worse. This is the prototype literature depiction.
3 to 4 months is a short event.
Indeed, it's a relatively, it could be, but it's not a 2-day fire. Okay? It's not a 2-day fire.
I'm sorry. I might be obsessed about this point that I've mentioned before. You said something which I think is very important. When can you declare? The moment you declare on an event as a cascading, that might change the whole thing, the whole operation.
Yeah, so, for example, if we're interested in designing declaration, it might be the case that we need to rethink our constitutional declaration of emergency as something that not at a certain point threaten the nation, whatever, but a prolonged declaration.
No, I know. But the point of the declaration,
we're getting there,
is a very major. This is
also in the literature. No, it's a big question.
So what I'm saying is that what would be the signal that when you see them, you say, now I have to declare. This part is, in my mind, is missing.
So basically, we have all kinds of.
So that's actually a good question that needs to be part of what this project
Exactly. So we can think about
seeking to do.
Is there differences between the constitutional declaration of emergency between cascading? Okay, let's go.
Yes, maybe you should.
Will affect many systems. You can see it.
Yes,
I think that there is low.
I think wait. I think if we just
is signals. By the way, there is a signaling theory about regarding all kind of events. So you see this signal. You say this is the case because I recognize the signal. We don't have signal.
So the question: what should there be a difference in declaration between single and cascading or multiple or complex? And what should be the criteria, i.e., the signals for such declaration? Now, of course, we know that the debate.
And is that legitimate to severe levels of constitutional declaration of emergency because we are foreseeing it would be cascading and so on and so forth? Question.
In the United Kingdom, there is no declaration at all, so they let go of the declaration altogether. But let's go.
Second, I think we can think about differences in terms of the significance of the state sovereignty. So we are all in the play field of events that exceeds state.
Only in complex.
And also in some state in cascade. So think about the Prague situation. It is multi-leveled. All Eastern Europe is engaged with it. Okay, so there are theory that emergency aroused the state sovereignty. Maybe we should we consider them. At the same tone, international cooperation is more important, but also we can think about competition on resources. Fady, go forward. While there's significant to some executive concentration of power, I want to offer you that multi-branch coordination is much more important than the concentration of power in the executive core. So in terms of Micha, doctrines or perception, the way we perceive Netanyahu as managing a single silo emergency is not the same way we should perceive him in a cascading. He has a much more theatralic performative role, but the real role is of bureaucracy and coordination. I think that
just a point here that relates to Benny's work. So when you have COVID, then the economic people have to manage the economic, and the health people have to manage the health, because this is cascading or multiple depending on the definition. So we were wrong in COVID in over concentration, but at the same time you need the coordination, because if they start to issue conflicting policies, then it's not going to work. So you have to make sure that the coordination really works, right? So you do need a hierarchical core, but you need to make sure, and we said this in real time in COVID to those who remember. So the problem is that the deliberation within the executive is not professional enough, because they didn't have a structured system. Only one voice, which was the medical voice all the time, but they didn't have a structured way of saying, now we stop. You have 7 minutes, economic people, you have 7 minutes to talk, and we're not going to disturb you. And that didn't happen, because they didn't see it as such. So,
and also, if you can think about it, if we reduce the weight of the executive core leadership, so we should be much more sensitive to abuse of power. Because if we think that the role of Gantz and Netanyahu in steering the ship of the corona reaction should be reduced, if we will see a prominent role by those guys, we can also think about that.
I don't want to hold the conversation here, but it's not that they should be reduced. It should be changed to check and balance.
Exactly, to more coordinated checks and balances.
Exactly.
And not me, or.
Exactly. So once you say, Oh, my role is to check on you, not to make the decision myself. It changes the whole perception.
Okay, I think that you can say that by definition, the crisis will pose some danger to the rule of law as a whole, and maybe even in severe cascade events to the democratic structure. Let's go forward. We saw a lot of cases in which the crisis will require special legislation. Once again, we'll talk in a minute about the disaster law as the administrative law of emergencies. And also in terms of restoration, it's not an event that you go out of it quickly, but there's affected community that will experience a lengthy rebuilding and also a need for rebuild critical infrastructure in a way that will once again will demand executive branch realignment. So I think this is something that difference. Also something to think about, just have another slide. Cascading emergency is somewhat, that's the slide, another one. Is somewhat transformative. In what sense? We think about like our classical notion of constitutional emergency is like we have an event, it disturbs us, we need to declare emergency in order to recover from it and to bring back the set of things like it was before, right? This is the perception. And cascading extreme events are transformative in the sense that it may be the case that the constitutional order would not be the same after you will go out. Think about the corona, it's a good example.
What about the Japan example?
Same, if I'm saying, the wonderful example, if I'm saying that due to the Japan incident, there was a conversation in all Europe about nuclear reduction, so that was a transformation.
How does it change the...
The Shaul fire did not create that.
No, but how does it change the model of democracy or the demos?
So, for example, I think that the corona could be, first of all, the Brazilian one could be a good example.
I'm not saying that it cannot happen. I'm saying why is it a feature of all cascading emergencies?
So once again, I won't defend that it's a feature of all cascading emergencies. I just wanted to highlight that extreme and severe cascade emergency could generate consequences for the political and the constitutional order. So I think the corona is a good example.
But this is true also for single events.
World War II.
World War II
is not a cascading, it's extreme event. It changed our...
No, this is World War II.
I don't know. This is example that will help me.
When it's World War, it is by definition complex.
You will answer yourself.
World is at war. This is
an easy example. The Brazilian nuclear event, which created a constitutional amendment. So if you're interested, what?
I remember. Did it?
That's what Stephanie.
No, it was an accident.
And another thing, in a theoretical level, there's legal people that perceived prolonged emergency as de facto constitutional amendment. If we delegate a lot of power to the executive for a long time in a way that deconstruct our institution, what we are ongoing is not just an emergency or a constitutional emergency. We are ongoing institutional constitutional change. Now, is that something that happens in each and every cascade? I won't sign on that, but I want to just mention that that normatively speaking, it's something different.
The thing again, it comes up again and again. The question is, does it have to be cascading emergencies the way we understand them, or cascading impact? If it makes a difference, and also, what about single silo? It can be so severe, just a single silo, that it would lead to a transformative something. Okay. So I'm just, this is more about impact per se.
So I will try, if we will make it in this space, to present climate emergency as the most demonstrative example for constitutional transformative emergency. And as opposed to that, you can think about it as a range, right? And as opposed to that, it could be that single-silo disaster are just something that requires a board of inquiry, and that's that. This is not something
that we define as transformative.
So, but then you build into the single silo thing. So, okay, but we can continue.
But it becomes clear. Different discipline. It becomes clear. The changes that you talk about are institutional. Institutional. Legal.
Could be social as well.
Yeah. That's a clear argument. But all these examples of the Second World War, the Syrian case, I don't see the cascading implication. This is something which is isn't clarified.
I agree. You don't think they're cascading.
Talk about the results. You want to talk about the process.
Okay, just want to once again make a simple point. Even if you define the Brazilian case as a single silo, I wanted just to emphasize that we have a perception of emergency that is a single event in which we declare emergency and we then stop the emergency. But the literature evolved due to a more complex understanding of emergency, also to a more normative complex understanding of transformation due to an emergency. It could be manifested in, I don't want to argue about it, in a complex cascading and okay. All right, let's talk about theory. How do you want to go forward with those slides, or I will do? So basically we have some familiar theories of emergency. This is Nadav's slide, so excuse me if I'm not that fluent. And we ask all kinds of questions like, do we have a unified theory of emergency? What is a state of emergency in terms of constitutional definition and declaration? And we have this underlying assumption that there is a conservative nature for the constitutional response to emergency because we delegate power to the executor and not to our ordinary chain of checks and balances. Let's move on the slide. We are moving in the last couple of decades between different perceptions for emergency, which could be characterized as legal absolutism, which states that emergency should be treated in a business as usual model, a more relatively perception.
But business as usual for Gross means that just the president can violate the law, and then later on,
isn't that the extra legal measure?
The extra legal measures.
Yeah,
but it's not as usual.
But absolutism, by definition means you have absolute power.
No, that's what I said, legal absolutism. Okay? Legal absolutism, once again, this is definitions by Nadav. I don't sign for it, but the perception is that legality continues business as usual, not power absolutism.
Nadiv, is this about emergencies or cascading?
No. About emergencies, but not talking about standard emergency. You should tell me.
Yeah, we've
on these slides because we know what you're
talking. So let's keep the.
If you want to argue about Lobel and Gross, we are in a serious problem.
So we don't need this as well, I guess.
Let's go about the divergence test in order for the non-jurists here to be familiar with. There's a couple of perceptions that deals with are we thinking about emergencies in terms of unbroken legality, legal continuity, or are we thinking about that as a holes of lawlessness defines in all kinds of characteristics? And as much as there's the divergence in our perception of those two paradigms, there's also convergence in the sense that current day literature is blurring those binary definition of extralegal or continuation and so on and so forth. And that brings me to Fady that won't talk about current theory, but on some new theoretical questions.
So I know this is going to be boring for those of you who have relatively are well read in this field. But I think because this project is about rule of law and basically what happens to our theories and our understandings of emergency powers and emergency theories once we introduce cascading and different prisms through which we understand disasters, I think we had the idea of just like see the underlying assumptions of our theories. There is kind of almost a wide understanding in the literature that the model upon which constitutional theories are predicated for emergency, especially the accommodation model, and but there's an argument for all of them, is the Roman dictatorship. And so I'm not going to tell the story, but the idea is that it had two dimensions to it. One is about power and exercise of power, and the second is about the special institution that has had those powers to exercise. But it was predicated on the idea of heteroinvestiture, which means that the person who declared, or the body that declares the emergency isn't the body that ends up exercising those powers. Time limits, what we call today sunset clauses, prohibition on changing the constitution. It's not a non-transformative, basically nature.
But Fady, I really don't want to be rude, but we want to be focused on the definition of cascading. And if we go,
but that's not
if we go too much into the theory of emergency law, we go back to things we've talked about 12 years ago, which is good, but
we talked about this.
No, but I don't understand we're rehashing things because
we're not. We just need to go to the
give them.
No. I'm willing to stop. You know what? We'll stop. Go to climate.
They're saying that we need to continue.
What is the new stuff? No. Fady, do it.
But Fady, we'll talk about new questions. I think.
I want to hear it from the beginning.
Yeah, I'm just gonna address the new questions, and you can decide what's relevant.
No, but give us the background because most people don't know. And I think it's important. I don't think it's refreshing.
So, given those origins, the modern emergency models kind of rest on the idea of the first half of the equation of the Roman model, but the power shifts within existing institutions usually flows towards the executive. And so we can raise questions about who has the right to declare an emergency. Does
Do you really need a declaration? No.
The check? I mean, yeah, obviously there are a lot of questions that could be asked, but those checks on this extraordinary power, do they exist in modern models, is a question to be asked. I'll skip over more detail, but the main argument, and that's why I guess the impetus for this whole project is because we are very suspicious towards emergency powers. And the suspicion is also about the enhancement in the executive branch's powers and how this can transform into undermining the whole constitutional order, provided that we are okay with the constitutional order pre-emergency powers implementation. And so different papers and different works show how in different contexts, the utilization of emergency powers leads to the permanent implementation of those powers or their consequences in the and so the distinction between normalcy and emergency gets blurred. So we have the famous work by Schauerman, that shows that in most liberal democracies, the emergency powers pertaining to economic policies have become so normalized that in the US alone, we're talking about hundreds of laws that enable the president to unilaterally pass policies pertaining to the economy. Health emergencies, the recent book by Alan Green talks about how while there was a rush to normalcy, and that would suggest that the pandemic emergency powers had little risk of becoming permanent, he does show in chapter 5 that some of these powers were creeping, and especially the risk of normalizing certain tools that were not really utilized before, like closures and ordering people to remain home, remained. But one of the issues that he highlights is not everything that changed after COVID is a bad thing. So understanding the need to kind of update our policies and prepare better for pandemics that could introduce different constitutional understandings towards pandemics is not necessarily a bad thing. And then obviously we have the terrorism example, which we don't need to elaborate on. In that sense, one of the main critiques is the fact that a lot of the counterterrorism law, and Israel is no exception, are no longer contingent on the existence of a declared emergency situation. Basically, subjecting counterterrorism legislation to the regular constitutional.
Terrorism is a crime.
But is it that the emergency becomes permanent, or that the normalization of the situation?
Both.
It's both. It's different things.
It's different things, but the risks are posed by both. And the risk is for reducing the threshold or the baseline for what a regular, normal, constitutional democracy will tolerate in terms of infringements and violations of human rights, what kind of powers the executive, the different branches have. We're talking about normally liberal democracies that have certain ideological bases for.
It's not that the emergency is permanent.
Yeah,
The
that's what
powers
it says,
that
right.
are-
Because of the risk analysis, they're changed.
I mean, there's an argument to be said
It
about
becomes normalized.
counterterrorism becoming basically just regular,
Right.
like a swath of land within like the regular constitutional order with its own themes and its own thresholds and constitutional.
Because there's ongoing terrorism. Yeah. But
So some questions. So I'm not gonna return those. We have the main concern is the curtailing of the abuse of the declaration power. That's like Green and Dizenhouse have different ideas about how courts could be more active.
I wish.
So the problem with this literature usually is that courts should, but like there's politics, there's like different sociopolitical aspects to why courts don't.
They say we're not willing to. Courts continuously say we're not willing to.
I think one of the most important books I read, it was by, I'm not, Rossiter, Clinton Rossiter from 48. So he identifies the problem already like back then, that the idea of declaration, even by the legislature, especially in systems where the legislature is being controlled by the executive, is not really a thing. He has 9 different criteria for how to maintain the constitutional dictatorships like legitimacy. And then you have Ackermans and others who focus more on parliamentary oversight. We'll not go there. We saw how that worked in the coronavirus. So when we think about cascading disasters and in relation to existing theory, I find that there isn't a lot of literature that puts in conversation the 3 bodies of work that are relevant here. So we have disaster studies, we have a sub or mini kind of field that translate that into places it within the legal sphere. So there are multiple books on disaster law, but don't touch, or very little amount of that work touches on constitutional dimension. They do deal with equality and inequality as a vulnerability in society, but that is the extent of what I found. So there is a detachment here, and why I'm saying it's important, because we need to be able to understand what the technical, and I'll call it the technical literature, even though it's very theoretical, it has a lot of history in it, and it's deep. But in terms of its recommendation, it does have some technical prescriptions that we don't know how those prescriptions might interact with our understanding of the constitutional limitations in our constitutional theories of emergency law. Emergency theory enters the picture usually when a disaster event hits. There isn't much theory from that literature that deals with the prior phases, mitigation and preparedness in particular. I'm not saying we have the answers, but I think these are avenues that are worth exploring. And based on the readings, I have some a sense that some tension exists between the substantive rule of law theories, especially those like Diddenhouses and others that are promoted within emergency law theories, and professional and technical scholarship. And it's not clear to what extent the natural disasters kind of world is imagined in the emergency theory literature. It's a question to those of you who are more read, but most of the literature deals with now the pandemic and the coronavirus, but prior it's a post 9/11 situation. Even Clinton.
COVID is natural, no?
I mean,
it depends whether they get help in the Chinese left after Chinese.
I mean, so that's why I put natural in quotes, because we need to be able to say, but do we have the same concerns once we deal with earthquakes, fires, and
the idea that more authoritarian regimes will use COVID to capture more systems, social systems. So that's the traditional line of literature.
I mean, we see that line of literature in COVID. We see it in counterterrorism scenarios and wars, for example.
Exactly.
But I'm saying there is a host of different disaster types that might not be imagined in that world, in that theoretical.
Like an earthquake. Earthquake will not necessarily be.
I mean, so if an earthquake is not really at risk of producing.
It might be. It depends the extent of the disturbance.
I'm not providing answers. I'm asking questions. I'm saying.
And the vulnerability.
No, I'm just thinking.
In a really vulnerable society, some leader may use an earthquake to say, okay, after the earthquake,
It's like the amount of chaos that results.
Yeah, so it's the theoretical possibility is there.
Yeah.
The books that deal with these phenomena do not, at least the ones I do not look at that possibility. And I'm not aware of any empirical case that is highlighted in the literature that poses that risk. So, I mean,
yeah.
That's my last slide. Cascades present certain questions and challenges. Like in terms of the declaration, so some systems might kind of look at each, like a health hazard as requiring, or a health crisis as justifying its own declaration. And then you have a different kind of emergency that might justify a separate declaration. Even the Supreme Court here had to deal with the question whether the general declaration was relevant and applicable to the situation in the coronavirus. And so when we're dealing with cascades that might kind of encompass different areas, from a legal design perspective, do we want a specialized body to declare an emergency once that cascade hits their jurisdiction, or do we want an overarching body that kind of sees the picture and has a declaration that covers the entire change of the cascades?
Which is partly what Micha and Nadiv were kind of.
Yeah, that's why I said we're getting to it. So I think, I mean, I'm not, again, this is an open question that might clash with both the professional.
But the question is whether we have a professional, whether we should actually have a methodologically disaster management people here to ask them that we need as lawyers, the signals, you have to develop some signals to say the potential of the cascading impact is such that it will raise to the cascading disaster, and therefore we need to know it now, because it may be too late later. Tell us now, what could be the tree branch, what are the possible, you need to think about it in advance. So.
Yeah. In the intelligence, they call it simanim eidim.
Yeah, I know.
But here, I think that this issue of declarations actually reveals something about the definition and the conceptual framing that I didn't think about before, but I think that it's central and it comes over and over. And it's the question of whether we talk about related set of events or things that are distinct, and it can be the same thing. So, for example, we talked about riots or armed conflicts or coup d'etat, and there was some suggestion that this is not what we're talking about when we're talking about cascades. But think about
we're talking about multiple.
But think about the state of emergency for atoms, right? It's different in the American constitutional, right? They call it differently, but conceptually it's the same. So they have the enemy, right?
Foreign enemy alliance.
Right? And the question was there, to what extent you can look at the war against ISIS as part of the war against Al-Qaeda. In our discussion, it seems to be the same thing, right? It's an armed conflict between a state and a non-state armed group, but these are distinct events, right? But on the opposite side of events, think about a war that creates an economic crisis and a collapse of the health system. Do we think that we need to have a different declaration to deal with these events? And I think that the answer will be no. And it suggests to some extent that there's something here to think a bit more about whether we think about the events as connected to the same chain, even if they deal with different disasters, or about the relationship between distinct events and the mutual effects between them. And I think that to some extent, conceptually,
why would be the answer no? So let's just
I can go further. Say, conceptually, the whole model of declaring emergency, the Roman model, which developed into a declaration of emergency, was built on the silo. And once we move from the silo to cascading, it's not anymore declaration of emergency, but accommodation or actually a permanent emergency as Fady, from a conceptual thing, you can say, it's not a matter anymore of declaring emergency for a short
Or you can go the other way, the opposite way. You could say it's very important then to declare. So my reaction to Yali would be, this is true if you accept Yali's point that you don't need a special declaration for health medicine. But if you do, let's say that precisely in order to avoid the slippery slope that Eli was talking about, you would want somebody to say, we reached a point where the health system is now collapsing and we need a special declaration for this, regardless of whether it's related to the war or one thing, then,
Or we need a permanent arrangement that contains cascading emergencies. And this means anti-terror law, which is permanent and not coming into effect.
But then Yali would say something like, we're in a constant state of a health crisis. Yeah. So, let me ask you this, Yali. How will we get out? Do you need a declaration to say that there is no longer a medical emergency, to get out of the medical emergency?
No, you don't need a declaration state of emergency, like general.
So state of emergency, technically the theory suggests You have to declare in and you have to declare out when it's over. And the most important thing is actually when it's over.
When you get out.
When you get out. So would you let go of,
No, do you remember the technology that Nadav did?
That involved?
I mean, in the earthquake project, Tony or Cascading, like 5 different models.
Yes, it's in. I talked about it in the central local.
Yeah, touches on this.
Yeah, we can talk about more about. It's in the unpublished chapter of the book. Yes.
Earthquake recovery for someone.
Wait, the earthquake recovery?
We looked at, we did case studies. We looked at Japan, New Zealand, Italy, Turkey, and Italy. And we conceptualized how each of them legally looked at disasters.
Right.
And there were 5 different models.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, that's right. You can see whether
there was a blueprint model.
Yes.
There was a central. There was there's an ad hoc model.
Yes.
Italy model. That's
just ad hoc.
If there's a disaster, let's just make laws for that.
Right. So when the prism is rule of law and concerns for the tools being used to deal with exceptional situations being normalized and becoming permanent, how do you actually conceptualize the dangers under a cascading scenario where it could be longer? The effects, some literature, especially David Alexander in his 2002 book, he does say like some recovery operations stages might take 25 years. So how do we kind of square that with our constitutional theories?
Our fears of normalizing the exception.
Yeah, and I know that Eli can say.
But you said that emergencies. You said no. Who is it?
He said, yeah.
That emergencies, especially cascading emergencies, are sticky. They take much more time to get out of them, or the residual impact.
Right. So that's what happened to you when you read about the same topic from different scholarly works. The disaster studies, they emphasize that certain aspects of disasters and they try to resolve that, but they don't have the constitutional prism in mind. And this project is ostensibly trying to bring those together and offer some kind of resolution. You might
normatively speaking.
Yeah. It might be what Eli is saying, and hey, maybe our whole framework needs to be the same framework adopted for counterterrorism. I really hope not. But if that ends up being the normative recommendation, then it'd be based on understanding both fields. So another aspect, I wrote here the relationship between politics and expertise, delving more deeply into questions of executive authority and decision-making processes. This is obvious to a lot of people, but the question is, how do you maintain that non-relevant political considerations or questions intervene in what really the expertise needs? Obviously, I know that you're rolling your eyes, and I understand why.
No, I'm saying that there's just I don't know how we haven't done this in our 12 years, but in the 1920s there was a famous debate between Dewey and Lippmann. It's called the Dewey-Lippmann debate. And the reason I'm saying this is because a couple of months ago there was a revisit of this debate of what did we learn in the last 100 years of the Dewey-Lippmann debate, which deals exactly with the relationship between elected politicians and unelected experts in terms of dealing with the public problems. They don't necessarily call it emergency, they don't distinguish, they call it public problems. And the shift is the problematic public. Right? It's not the problem, it's the public that is the problem, because the Problems are the problems, but the question is how you deal with it. So this has been ongoing for 100 years.
Yeah. I mean, all the literature places this under the like the Schmittian decisionism.
Schmitt is one blip there. But
but I'm just saying that the risk is highlighted there in that context, that not only he who decides to declare an emergency, but also what is needed.
Yes.
And that's a real challenge that we meet generally, but in cascading is going to be even more pronounced. Centralization versus cooperation across departments. So the question of jurisdictional fragmentation, that the fire department has its own decision-making rules and jurisdiction, and then the water. So how do you actually bring those together?
And not only that, there is also geographical fragmentation, because you can say, well, some people are responsible for this geographical area and others are for that.
So an interesting recent case from the Spain electricity grid situation. They declared an emergency and created an opt-in system for the territories and autonomous regions, basically saying, if you want the powers, and I guess it was like related to potential violence that might erupt, and if the state itself or the region cannot. So they actually created an opt-in process. If you want it, we have it. Like, we're ready. That's an interesting model that I haven't seen before. I don't know.
So, and there's a tendency, Stefan and Christian has an icon paper on the design of declaration. There's a longitudinal thrust of moving from core executive declaration to inter-branch declaration to professional declaration to collaborative declarations. And this legal design, I think, is a consequence of a more complex understanding of disaster.
Which
but there's a lot of work to do.
Which brings us to the temporal misalignment dimension, which, as we said, cascades might stretch over longer periods of time. Emergency might also continue to apply. I mean, since we live in Israel and we know that emergency exists since 1948, it seems like, but this is abnormal, right? So the question is...
Are you suggesting Israel is abnormal?
Yeah. At the Ben-Gurion Center for the answer.
So that I'll maintain my... I'll plead the fifth.
But the fact that there is a state of emergency, a declaration of emergency, necessarily means that there is an emergency.
There is a state.
So it means that, so from a purely legal perspective, it means whatever powers that are contingent on the existence of a state of emergency may be utilized, except for the Supreme Court basically limited the option of the government to actually issue regulations if the Knesset is available.
The definition of emergency. I mean, we have the legal.
So in the corona situation, the argument was brought before the court, hey, that emergency declaration should not apply here because there's like this in Kudat B'riut Ha'am, there's like this organ that has the right.
Public health ordinance.
That should declare, and then that wasn't the purpose. The court didn't accept that argument. Sadly, I mean, and created a situation in Israel that every emergency can be basically absorbed under the general declaration.
49.
But the tools available to the government may vary based on the availability of the Knesset, how immediate the response needs to be. And so within that regime, you have different regimes that are very malleable, and I don't know how to make sense of it. But
I think some of this is relevant. You have more?
So the last point is revisiting the non-transformative, again, theory, emergency law theory. A non-transformative in the age of prolonged and cascading disasters, can it survive or should it? I don't know if you want to deal with the climate one or we get it out.
Wait.
I'm just starting to understand.
Four more slides. I think.
No, just 3 slides. It's interesting, I think.
There were 5, 4, 3. I mean, you're changing the numbers every second.
3, we buy 3.
No, I have 3. I have 3. 1, 2, 3.
Let's finish that.
So, just in order to finish, I think that it's interesting because Fady has presented like general questions about how can we adapt theory to our new realm of study, but this is a paper that actually does some work. So I always like, and it's unique in the sense that for my study, I haven't found good papers that are trying to reflect and utilize current constitutional emergency theory towards new realms of emergencies. So, and this is a good work that I think could give us a fresh notion of how can we do some new theoretical lines from what we already know. So there is a phenomena of emergency climate declaration. Those are declarations that their telos, their mean is to frame climate change as an emergency. The question if climate change it's a complex situation, but the question if climate is emergency is debatable. We can speak for 20 minutes only about that. If we are relating to what Maya was commenting 2 hours ago, so think about it. There's like, it could be that in the same country, there's a social and political segment that perceived climate as emergency, and as opposed to that, there's a social and political segment that do not perceive climate as a policy problem, or even do not perceive it as something that exists. This is, for me, a fascinating social phenomenon, right? One's emergency, as opposed to Corona, everybody agrees. Even in Corona, they were not that, but you know, yeah. but one's emergency is not the others, and the meaning of the ones who are utilizing the emergency rhetoric is not actually responding to an imminent threat, but to utilize this discourse for social change. Climate declaration are not orders made by the executive. Once again, we've already talked about how we decentralize executive, rethink executive call. So here are declarations that the executive is not involved. We'll see in a minute. Rather, there are statements that made predominantly by legislative and local. So, for example, in Israel, we have a climate forum, which is totally not led by the government. It's being led by the president, which try to urge the government to do all kinds of things. So, so this is as opposed to executive action. They do not authorize nothing and do not use the classical measures that we are familiar with in state of emergency, and they actually create kind of an emergency routine, right? The declaration is there not in order to vanish, but to maintain and to be prolonged with us, which is totally against the normative question of the denormalization of the exception. If you can take the slide forward. And now we can think about 3 dimensions of, I'm sorry.
Question because
it's more of a comment.
Yes, it's a very small comment.
Yeah, of course.
In Rio and in the summer, we have a wave of heat.
Heat wave, yeah.
More than 50 degrees. So the mayor, really hot. One day I went to the hospital because I feel terrible bad. And so the executive power starts to interview the question. It's not just a declaration about the climate, but in this case, this is very new. I never saw this happening, but in this case, the mayor and the executive power made a lot of not just declaration, but
decrees.
Yeah, but they made some measures, and we decided that our phone, a kind of alarm, telling for the population that the wave of heat wave, has increased to the level 5. So you need to stay at home and a lot of measures and
decrease. Once again, this seems more like immediate response to a regular emergency, while transformative emergencies like climate emergencies has the aspiration to totally solve the climate problem. Okay, so this is the difference. So now we can very briefly, we can think about the ways in which those transformative emergencies are different from the classical notion of emergency. So we are familiar, let's say, in terms of preparedness with the immediate contained threat of the imaginary response.
No, usually it's about response.
Okay, all I want to emphasize is that the difference between those two and this one is that the declaration is there in order to lift some issue from the regular policy arena to a policy prioritization. It doesn't work as a disaster or something like that.
Not only, sorry for intervening, but at least there is one case I'm aware of in which you can take it to court. And then the court can say that there's a duty on the government.
The Federal Constitutional Court in Germany, but this goes against the thrust of climate emergency because specifically in the German case, there was kind of a coexistence between the executive and the Federal Constitutional Court because the Federal Constitutional Court knew that if he will deliver the decision, the executive will acquiesce. Here, there's a conflict between the executive that doesn't want to do anything in order to mitigate the challenge and other branches of power and local.
There's another case in Holland, I think, that is now making through the, that it's not clear whether it's, so I'm not talking about the politics. You're right about the politics in Germany, but from a legal perception, the fact that courts can it's not just
set goals.
It's not just policy.
This case that Amnon talks about is the most progressive case at current comparative constitutional law. So in terms of declaration, we talk just a second about declaration, and also in terms of accountability, classic state of emergency are declared and perceived as something that we should relate accountability to the core executive. Other models, as I talked to Deborah, are more collaborative or plural. And in the case of climate emergency, we perceive the society as a whole and the scientific community as one that declares the emergency against the executive. And that's basically it. No, I have the slides here. Maybe I want to say, okay. Temporality-wise, I just want to show you that in the terms of the question that we talked about, there are interesting variants and differences. So temporality-wise, we can think about the emergency, the regular one is a short-lived, the cascade is a prolonged. Here, the emergency is talking about a present policy problem, but actually it talks about ongoing emergency that will affect the future. It's not a present or forecast. Okay? And the last one is that if we talked about in case of cascades or disaster, preparedness and ongoing resolution, here we are talking about multi-ongoing systematic response. So if we talked about extreme condition as a multi-systematic phenomena, we perceived climate emergency as a multi-systematic response. And the last point that I want to make is that this is administrative. Exactly. So in the sense that it also, when you say multi-systematic response, you actually involve the administrative set, but I just want to make it quick and don't elaborate about that.
So it's not constitutional.
It's truly not constitutional. You actually need to think about the administrative law of emergency. This is maybe my project in the. The last slide is my conclusion, and that is that the new characteristic of transformative emergency can be generalized to other extreme conditions. So think about democratic emergency in the same terms. This is for Maya, just in order to wrap it and try to say something about it. So think about the Polish response of the new government in trying to restore the rule of law. There's, by the way, now all kinds of commission to restore the rule of law. So I don't know if the Polish one is correct, but think about the fact that if Yair Lapid becomes the prime minister, he will declare a democratic revival emergency. Just a food for thought. That's it.
Democratic revival business. So this is in terms of recovery and rehabilitation as an emergency.
Yeah.
But wait, thank you for bringing us to recovery, and so that means that. But what
and
about
it's an emergency in terms of policy priority.
Yeah, but even before the recovery and rehabilitation, should there be a democratic emergency if it isn't elected?
A good question, but if we have certain political climate, as the same example as the climate emergency, you can perceive the democratic dysfunction as an ongoing emergency, in which you need to
which differences, because to extend the climate change to our framework is a very, very far-reaching.
It's a bit provocative. This is why I present it.
I think it's very interesting to think about it. But the whole rationale for emergency from a legal perspective is that we cannot rely on the decision-making processes and the institution in normal time.
Because we don't have the time.
Because we don't have the time. And the magnitude of the uncertainties are immediate and very
and the risk, yeah.
And here it's that nothing corresponds to these conditions.
We know exactly what needs to be done. We have the time.
Yeah.
But we don't have the urgency. It's not prioritized.
But the general legal process to apply to the Constitutional Court saying the government must act and so forth. But this is not the case of democracy. Actually, you can say that there is much more justification
for a democratic kind of state of emergency and not the climate.
Right, and the climate.
But the question is, who will issue a declaration of a democratic emergency, and who will then get more powers? The executive will get even more powers than the democratic emergency.
Okay.
We the people.
Time for a break.
Thank you, Fady, Nadav.
Nadav,